Joining us now is business consultant and policy analyst Olukayode Oyeleye. Joining us right now. It's nice to have you join us this morning.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Now, talk to us basically. A lot of people from the comments we have heard so far have been commending the National Assembly, first of all, for working tirelessly to ensure that the 2020 budget is passed at least a month ahead of the coming year. Talk to us, how significant is this to the progress that we're trying to make in that regard?
Well, with regards to the timing, I think it's a good thing. Really, it's highly commendable. It shows clearly that efforts are being made to ensure that the budgetary allocations are made early enough, and then, of course, the various operational arms of government will be able to have the funds needed to do whatever they need to do in good time, as opposed to earlier times when the budgets get passed way behind schedule and slowing down a lot of things in the country. And the significance can also be underscored by the fact that our economy actually is strictly tied to budgetary cycles, and activities cease when budgets delay, and a lot of things that are supposed to be done early enough, things that are strictly time bound, also suffer a lot of setback as a result of the delay in the passage of budget. To that extent, yes, I think it's a very good thing that the budget is going to be passed a lot earlier.
All right. So are you confident now that this will translate to budget performance? Because that has also been a major concern for most Nigerians.
It does not necessarily translate to a better performance. As a matter of fact, given the experiences of the past many years in this country, we are already getting used to these annual rituals of the whole economy waiting for budgets to be passed and all of that. But we should begin to look at the percentage of what is actually allocated that is eventually disbursed. And then, of course, at the point of disbursement too, how much of this is actually being used to execute projects and programs of the government. And is that at that point that we should begin now to look at whether or not this is going to make a difference. But as long as those experiences of the past still remain, then of course it might make little or no difference at all. Yeah.
If you look at the 2019 budget, it was passed almost in the middle of the year, and a lot of people are saying, well, if we are going to have the 2020 budget commence from January, then it is most likely that the 2019 budget would have had only a few, exactly, very short lifespan.
That's
but we've had ministers say the funds and the project and everything will be rolled over. But if it is going to be rolled over, shouldn't that have been provided for? That would affect, one, the figure, the budget figure for 2020 and all of those instruments?
Yeah, operationally, there are disconnects actually between the various arms of the government. For instance, the policy arm of the government and then the bureaucracies. Yeah. There's a lot of disconnect. And the procedures and bureaucracies slow down a lot of things. And projects and programs that are supposed to be implemented often don't even take off at the appropriate time. So rolling over or not rolling over won't still make so much of a difference, operationally, because there are so many technical, issues that we have to be looked into. And since, in particular, the civil service emphasizes more of bureaucratic processes, over and above actual execution of projects, this might still not make so much of a noticeable difference. And then, of course, talking about the idea of, the short lifespan of the 2019 budget, we should be looking at a situation in which a lot of unspent money would have to be returned to the coffers. And then, of course, even the procedure itself is something. And let's also understand one thing, that in the public service, you are not expected to spend money on projects that have not actually been budgeted for. Number one, you talk about the problem of environment, and the legal implication. And then, of course, you look at the fact that, you want to look more at the correctness of the books as opposed to actual execution of projects. So all of these would tie, would tie the hands of, the executors of the budget.
All right.
Now that the Senate is set to break an 11-year jinx, how can we achieve a better performing budget with this new cycle?
Okay, first and foremost, I like a situation in which there would be a clear breakdown of what this budget would be used for in the first instance. And then, of course, they should also elaborate on timelines. And we need to look at, how we're going to spend this money. And I mentioned earlier about bureaucratic bottlenecks. How are we going to be able to get over this? These are essential issues that we need to look at. That's number one. Number two, what are the clear policy directions that we're trying to really pursue? The public will need to be properly briefed about this because it's very important. And then, of course, we should be looking at the issues of monitoring and evaluation because, generally speaking, we expect that midway into a budget cycle, we should be looking at how far have we gone, what are the progress made, and stuff like that. And then, of course, we'll be able to know where we need to fast track, or if there's a need. If we are not meeting up with the pace at which certain things are supposed to be done. So all of these are issues that I believe would need to be in place for us to be able to make something positive out of the budget. One thing I would like to mention in particular is the procurement aspect of much of what is being done, because you look at the issues of contracts and projects and all of that, which must pass through procurement. And then our procurement system really, on the paper looks very good, but operationally there are a lot of things gone wrong, which is why we don't so much deliver when it comes to budget promises. And of course we talk about the percentage of funds usually released at the end of the day, in which case you have sometimes 30% of the budgetary allocation being released at the end of a budgetary cycle. And these are some of the issues that we need to critically look at from the word go. And the early passage of this budget bill should give us an opportunity and a window for us to be able to get things right.
When it comes to the prosperity of Nigerians and what they stand to benefit from the budget, which is the overall objective anyway, what do Nigerians stand to benefit more? How well off are Nigerians when it comes to the cycle now beginning from January to December, which the Senate is trying to work towards? Okay.
First and foremost, we need to look at issues like, is our budget really demand-driven? Those are the kinds of things we need to look at. And what are the critical areas of the economy that we want to actually deploy this budget? These are some of the issues that should engage our attention. And then who are the players, the operators? And what are the key issues that we really want to deal with? What are the development objectives that we want to really achieve? If we put all this in perspective, then of course it will be easier. But in a blanket case in which we're just following the annual ritual of a budget presentation, we may really not go too far. But I don't want to expect. I don't want to expect that that should be the case anyway. But without clear-cut direction, of course, it may just be like any other ritual at the end of the day. Take for an example, we want to look at a field like agriculture. In the past couple of years, for instance, you talk about agriculture and the economy. We've seen cases of a lot of commodities being imported, and yet we're not talking about clear directions as to what needs to be done to really meet our food need in the country. The import bill is rising. And but for the recent case of border closure, which is a different subject matter altogether, you can imagine how much of Nigerians' money is being frittered out in terms of importation. And then you look at an issue like rice, which is a major commodity. In this past couple of years, for instance, the question should be asked: who is driving rice production policy in this country? Central Bank, which is supposed to be more occupied with monetary policy, had moved into the fiscal space. And of course, the question we should be asking is, what is the ministry doing in terms of, because obviously money must have been allocated to certain things in the Ministry of Agri, for an example. And if you look at, let me just cite an example of issues like the Maputo Declaration, to which Nigeria is a signatory, for instance. We are supposed to allocate a particular percentage, about 10% of the budget to agriculture. The question now is, if you look at this budget, what percentage of the budget would be going into agriculture? These are some of the issues we should be looking at. Or health, for instance. So health financing, what percentage of the budget is going to health? Because these are some of the critical areas. And of course, you look at infrastructure, roads, in recent times, about a week ago, we're reading about the issue of roads being tossed, between the federal and the state government and all of that. So people are not ready to take responsibilities for who should be in charge of this. So what are we allocating for infrastructure, especially, like road, which, something
so
that is
in that
very
case, we need to be more strategic
correct.
and deliberate.
Exactly. We should be deliberate. We should be strategic. We should look at timelines. We should give ourselves this task of saying, look, we're going to deliver on this. You don't have to have 100% performance on the budget because there are so many vagaries, so many unexpected circumstances that will arise along the way. But you should have a target, and then you work towards the target, and then you can use the target now to determine what percentage of success you've been able to make. And that, whatever you are not able to achieve within that budget cycle, you can roll over to another budget cycle.
Earlier, you raised a concern about the bureaucratic bottlenecks. I wonder what these bottlenecks are that have to be taken out of the way.
First and foremost, playing up procedures, over and above performance is a major problem in the public service. I mean, for instance, now you cannot proactively, look at a particular problem area and say, let us fix it if money has not been, officially, approved for it, even if it is time. And then, of course, the issue of extra budgetary allocations or, emergency allocations and all of that, they are areas that have their own peculiar problems. And then, of course, if we think about the need for us to get certain things accomplished, then of course we can create that little window of exception that look, if this has to be done and then bureaucratic bottlenecks would delay, why don't we go through this route and get it accomplished? Okay. But in terms of you must play by the rules, by the book. If you don't, then of course some people can do the right thing and still go to jail within the system as it operates.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. In discussing the passage of the budget before the December 2020 and also ensuring that it performs appropriately, there were aspects of monitoring and evaluation that we talked about. Now, put into proper perspective what you mean or what you envisage or what you are trying to emphasize on.
Okay. Well, I expect first and foremost that the political leaders should have a clear idea of what they want to achieve with the budget. And having done that, then the public service that would be the executing arm of the policy should also be brought into the vision as to what is to be done. And then, of course, there should be clarity about how we're going to divide every program or project into phases. And then, of course, how do we also allocate funds in the course of the execution, because traditionally, it's been known that there are a lot of leakages in the system. A lot of things, even now, TSA or no TSA, a lot of leakages still exist. And of course, there are issues of overinflation, of over-invoicing and stuff like that, of budgetary allocations and, projects that are supposed to be, funded with the budget. And a bulk of activities now have to do with, the arm of the public service that has to do with procurement. And you want to look at the issue of how transparent these projects or programs that will have to be funded are, then how relevant are they to our development, expectations? It's not just going to be budget for budget's sake. It's not going to be just allocating funds, for the sake of so doing. And where you have a multiplicity of, projects that are addressing same problem, you must be able to bring them together. So there must be a proper coordination. So where you have two different activities dovetailing into each other or overlapping, you think about which one is necessary and which one can be done away with, so as to avoid frittering money away. The interesting thing is we hear about trillions. Now we now hear about trillions of naira, in budgets. But does a common man on the streets, feel the impact of these trillions? That's one of the things we should be talking about. And then, of course, we see all these issues of, states coming to ask for bailout and all of that. Questions should be asked as to how responsible are these states with regards to, frugality and the proper utilization of the public funds. I mean, these are some of the issues. So if you are, if somebody comes to you to borrow money to do something, you may reasonably ask him, can I really have an idea of the thing you are using the money for?
To justify the request for the money.
These are some of the things we should be looking at. Yes, states are autonomous, we agree, but even in the face of the autonomy, there must also be this kind of transparency that will make us to be able to know that, yes, so much is going to these states, and then this is what they are doing. So we should be able to verify. That's very, very important. So I still come back to this issue of monitoring and evaluation that you are talking about. It must be ongoing and periodic, so that in case a particular budget line, is not actually meeting, the implementation is not meeting the expectation, then you can quickly review and think about how to make necessary changes along the line, because these things are not supposed to be cast in concrete.
All right. Well, when it comes to the issue of if being effective and being impactful, a lot of people agree that the role of the private sector is very central and key to all of this. How does the private sector come in here when it comes to collaborating to ensure that the budget is quite effective?
Yeah, quite sadly in this country today, private sector usually is being given minimal role, or in some cases they are not even allowed at all. I think it's high time Nigerian governments, at various levels, begin to look at the issue of bringing the private sector to the fore. And we talk about policies, we talk about budgets and all of that. Now, some people say government has no business in business. Well, to a very reasonable extent, we could agree, but government cannot completely opt out of business, in the sense that, one, government has the responsibility of playing regulatory roles in some cases. They have the advisory roles in some cases, and of course even research, because it's government, they have the resources and they are expected to have the critical mass of personnel that should be able to do research. And to that extent, we should be able to know what are the peculiar problems of the private sector. About 2 weeks ago, I mentioned the issue of AMCON, for instance. I want to bring this by way of digression. Why should AMCON only be playing the role of undertaker, when companies are collapsing, especially those that are owned by Nigerians? Okay. Why don't we look at what are the intrinsic problems that are leading to the collapse of these companies?
So that they can be taken head on.
Exactly, and make sure that they don't die.
Dr. Olukayode Oyeleye, thank you so much for your insight into this.
Thank you very much.
Much.